Welcome back to the Rolando Estacado channel. My name is Rolando, and today we're going to be covering something very special. We're going to be covering the American Bowie Knife. I was first introduced to the American Bowie Knife in the early 2000s by my Jeet Kune Do instructor Armando Basulto, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Admittedly, the Bowie knife that he shared with me was a Pakistani blade. It wasn't really well made, but it was the first time I started to explore the idea that a knife was something that was balanced very differently. And the reason why I immediately fell in love with it was once I held it in my hand, it actually moved and behaved a lot like a Filipino stick because of its size. Started reading about it, started studying it. I read Mr. Bill Bagwell's book all the time when I first got it. Then I read The Bowie Knife by Raymond Thorpe. And then I read other books called The Bowie Knife, which chronicles the use of the Bowie knife in the American frontier. Ultimately, the methodology that I used and learned from through my instructor Armando Basulto is through the Bagwell Keating lineage, and the Bagwell Keating collaboration was very interesting because it really opened my eyes to how the American Bowie blade is used, of course now more popularly as a utilitarian tool, but really as a combat tool, and it helped me understand overall biomechanics. I'll share this with you. I know that when I first spoke to Mr. Bagwell about ordering several of his custom Bowie knives, a pair of them being a righty and lefty Bagwell Bowie, a Hell's Bell, he asked for a drawing of my hand, and he said that the shape of my hand, especially the width of my palm, was going to give him an idea of my hip and also my ability to produce force from my hip, which then transfers into my hand. This was a very interesting insight, and this was in the early 2000s, because when he shared that with me and in my conversations with him afterward, it helped me start to understand that the ability to produce force as it relates to bladed weapons also has a lot to do with the core and your ability to coordinate from your core all the way into your hand. And frankly, I first learned this through Mr. Bagwell using the Bowie. So I can't wait to share this with you, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Here's a sampling of my Bowie collection. The top three are Bagwell Customs, and the bottom one, the smaller one, is a Randall 1.8. Really great designs here, and if you take a look at the bottom pommel part of the Bagwell Customs, he put in these really beautiful details. I wanted to show you more of my collection. Once again, Princess Giselle had her own ideas. Anyway, here's a production model of the Bill Bagwell Hell's Bell from Ontario, and every detail on a Bagwell Bowie is purpose-driven, and that purpose is combat. His specialty was to create buoys that were combat driven, meaning they were differentially hardened to handle any theoretical impacts blade on blade. But the idea behind it is that every little detail is for the combat driven practitioner. This is my prized custom Bagwell in Damascus. Observe this false edge over here, and Bill said that this is the true advantage of a Bowie knife, a fighting Bowie knife, because an edge can be spread out along the surface of a balloon and not burst it, but a concentrated back cut along the tip can actually burst it upon contact. And a back cut is leveraging that false edge almost like a karambit. So here's a slash across a piece of paper, and note the kind of damage that it can do. And this applies not only to Bowie Customs with about 11 or 12 inches, but even the Bowie profile that you can find here on the Randall made 1.8 model. The intelligent and efficient design of the Bowie knife and how swift it moves is accompanied by movements and techniques that I find are really specific to it because of its unique leverage design. So for example, this is what's called a snap cut. It starts off almost looking like a regular thrust, but then it snaps right above your forehead. So on the one hand, it looks like it's going to be a thrust right between your eyes, but then before you know it, pow, it snaps right on top of your forehead. So it's like you're being hit by a crowbar by the edge of a very powerful Bowie knife. And that leverage and design almost feels like, when I've sparred with it using a trainer, you get hit by a snap cut, it's almost like you're getting hit by a lead pipe right on top of it. very hard to replicate with regular knives. What I'm about to show here now is, in my opinion, the pièce de résistance of the Bowie Combatives techniques, and this is the back cut. I want you to note that this is the false edge right over here, and that's what you're going to be cutting with. So compare its overall length to the true edge over on this side. It makes up maybe 33% overall, but that's what you're going to be cutting with along with the tip. So take a look. The true edge slices really well, but a back cut, holy smokes, look what it can do. That's like the size of my face. Tremendous. Anyway, a back cut is one of the techniques that Bill would talk about a lot and write about a lot, and it's what he called steel leading flesh versus flesh leading steel. So I'm going to show you a very quick illustration of this, because when you combine all of these things, what you end up finding with the Bowie knife is that you're leading with steel all the time rather than with your flesh. So I'll give you an illustration. What I mean by flesh leading steel is when I'm about to slash, I'm leading with my hand. This leaves my hand completely vulnerable to a technique called defanging the snake, where my opponent intercepts my strike and hits my hand. Although this technique is very common in most weapons-based art, it is one of the most vulnerable. Now, if we compare it to the back cut, did you see that? Did you see what the back cut actually looks like? It doesn't register to the human eye. To go from this position to this position does not register to the human eye, so it's absolutely invisible. So this kind of damage can be created by a movement that is absolutely invisible to the human eye. So a Bowie back cut flow can actually throw somewhere between 10 to 12 back cuts in about 3 seconds, which is absolutely devastating. That's the power of this technique, and that's the power of this Bowie knife design. The Bowie knife is one of my top weapons combat practices, and that back cut flow is one of my top daily practices because of this steel leading flesh methodology and paradigm, which allows me to rethink this flesh leading steel paradigm, which is a big part of a lot of my methods and practices. So flowing, steadily moving from core to arm centric with a Bowie knife is absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend. So that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Stick around, stay tuned, more episodes to come.